Welcome to the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, psychology student and international best-selling psychology author of over 30 psychology books, bringing you the latest psychology news, fascinating psychology topics and more each week. If you want to learn more, then please check out connorwhiteley.net/books. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube video or follow on your favourite podcast app. And here's the show. Hi everyone and welcome to episode 312 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Con Whiteley. And today's episode is on Do Feminists Hate Men? And is Saturday the 1st of March 2025 as I record this. So today's podcast episode is a lot of fun because every single year I do mean to celebrate International Women's Day, but by the time I get round to it, or by the time I think about it, it's actually on the day itself, and it is normally never on a podcast production day, or a day that I actually remember, which is bad on my part. So this is why I'm doing it slightly early. International Women's Day is a week from today. So this is more International Women's Week. That is what I'm going to term it. So in today's podcast episode, by the end of it, you're going to understand more about feminism, misandry, and a lot of the modern research about are feminists misandrists in the skies. And the reason why I'm keeping this quite vague is because, unfortunately, feminism has become a dirty word. And this is something that I do not agree with because there's a lot of myths and misconceptions about what feminists actually are. So I don't want to scare people off straight away because there are men and women who do not identify as a feminist, and there are men and women who are very much anti-feminist. So I want to keep this introduction to this episode quite broad and quite non-specific. Approach this with an open mind, and then I will talk about the research more later on. But you are going to learn a lot from today's episode. And I actually include a research study that my supervisor worked on, so I'm actually really looking forward to this. So you got that to look forward to in the content part of today's episode. So moving on to the psychology news section, we're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest, and the first one is Pandemic Kids Struggle Identifying False Beliefs. Changes in the cognitive and social capacity of young children since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic are often put down to the social impacts of lockdown, the closure of schools, lack of social contact, and increased time spent at home. Understanding of the cognitive impacts of COVID infection at a young age is also limited. As such, we still know fairly little about how the acute phase of the pandemic affected the development of social cognition in early childhood. In other words, how young people understand and process social information effectively. A new study from Rose M. Scott and a team published recently in Scientific Reports begins to fill this gap with a look at a specific facet of social cognition, the ability to recognize that others might hold false beliefs. This is an important part of child development. Understanding that someone may hold false beliefs about the world is a key element of distinguishing between the mind and reality, and forms an important part of cooperation, communication, and learning. This study finds significantly worse false belief understanding in young children who lived through the acute phase of the COVID pandemic. Okay, so whilst there's not a great amount that I can personally say about this one, because developmental psychology is not a specific area that I look at, and to be honest, the COVID-19 pandemic hasn't really made its way into lecture theatres yet, or the other various ways how I get my psychology news. But I will say this, so as an outreach and ambassador, during the first year of our events after COVID, we all recognised a stark difference between the children that we worked with before and after the pandemic. Because post-pandemic, we did start to find that children were a lot more quieter, they were not as engaged, they were finding communication and a whole bunch of other social skills a lot more difficult than they had been. So, to be honest, social cognition was definitely impaired by the pandemic, which I think is heartbreaking because now we've got to create interventions, we've got to create resources, money, and other ways to try and help these children catch up, just so they're not disadvantaged in a later life. Because I can already see the difficulties that children are facing, and yes, it is 5 years on this month actually, from the COVID-19 pandemic and COVID lockdown. I think in 2 weeks' time, then it's 5 years, which I think is quite stunning. To be fair, so this is something that we've got to solve. We've got to research it. We've got to understand it more. Because once we get a solid research base and we truly understand how did a COVID impact our children and their development, this is when we can start creating more effective interventions that are going to help them and set them up for hopefully a successful and thriving life. So the second one is dreaming and remembering. In the last few years, there were increased numbers of reports online of people having odd dreams, and interest rose as more and more people felt they were recalling their dreams more frequently than before. Whilst we know from previous research that going through traumatic experiences and stress can be associated with increased number of dreams which throw around distressing concepts, this abrupt surge in dream recall, as Valentina Elves and colleagues call it in their recent publication, is slightly different. We don't know exactly what makes someone likely to recall their dreams upon wakening, but Elsa and the team find in their latest work that a few factors could make it more probable. In their egg experiment published this month in Communication Psychology, the team explored dream reports by over 200 Italian participants to try and tease apart why some of us have the dream stick in our memory, whilst others don't. And I will read one paragraph from the BPS Research Digest write-up. Individual differences such as age also played a role. Those on the younger end of the participant pool, who as a whole were aged between 18 and 70, were more likely to recall their dreams in general. More mature participants, on the other hand, tended to report the sensation of having dreamt whilst the details escaped them, an experience also known as white dreams. This finding in particular made just age-related changes in the ability to recall dreams. So again though, you can definitely tell I don't actually look at these Research Digest articles until I come to record the podcast. But one interesting thing though that I did want to mention was that dreams, I definitely think, have a few behavioural impacts going on my behavioural experience. But first of all, I would say that if you're able to record good dreams, then you can definitely wake up feeling good though, and that can help you give you motivation. It can help you make good feelings, full feelings throughout the day, and it can just give you a little more oomph, perhaps, when trying to get out of bed. But equally, I would definitely say that dreams also have the power to disrupt your day, really decrease your mental health, especially if they're traumatic dreams and they're related to trauma. Because to be honest, going on my own egg experience, you spend enough of your day dealing with trauma and trauma responses and struggling to function. So going to sleep, you would hope, would be a little peace away from your trauma. But no, traumatic dreams are not fun. Fun though, because they really do disrupt your day, they make you feel awful, and they mean there is no escape from trauma. Whether it's day or night, the trauma is with you and it is making you process it in the most horrific ways imaginable. So yeah, so not fun, but definitely interesting food for thought. So the last one is, what makes a favourite child? Anyone with siblings has likely heard jokes about parental favouritism. True impartiality in parenting, though, is no laughing matter, with previous research showing that siblings who genuinely receive a better treatment from a parent tend to develop stronger mental health, healthier relationships, better self-regulation than their less fairly treated counterparts. Despite research on the effects of favouritism, however, we know less about which children are more likely to be favoured. Writing in Psychological Bulletin, Alexander C. Jens and Michael A. Johnson Wells explored this question, finding that gender, age, personality can all influence whether a particular child becomes the favourite. Okay, so there's two main things that I want to say about this point. So, first of all, I would definitely say that, of course, favoritism, we're not meant to have favorites. We're not meant to have like a favorite person, a favorite child, etc. I think we all know that is an utter lie because everyone does just have favorites. It's part of who we are, and it's just part of being human. And yes, it is not ideal. From my personal experience, it really does impact your mental health. It can lead to attachment difficulties, and it really can make your self-regulation really bad and very, very maladaptive, to be fair, when it comes to if you're not the favourite child. So that is something that's definitely got to bear in mind them, and it can be really difficult. I do know that. But I would also say that trying to think this from a more applied angle is that now that we understand, or now that we're starting to understand, what can make a child more likely to be the favourite, what is the next step? Possibly a next step could be if we can identify which children are not likely to be the favourite, is there something we could do to support them, just so they do have stronger mental health, healthier relationships, and better self-regulation? I think it might be something to think about because I know from my egg-like experience that it would have been lovely to have some sort of intervention because I was not the favourite in a few different aspects of my life though, and it did harm my relationships and my attachment styles. So I think it would be interesting to see, could there be something that we could do to help these people and to help these non favourites. Plus, it would also be interesting to see from you, listeners, what your experiences of being the favourite child, but also not being the favourite child, if that's applicable to you. I would absolutely love to hear from all of you. So, I hope you enjoy the psychology news section. So, let's move on to the personal update. So we're moving on to the personal update. So this week has been so much fun because I really do love the weeks where my life is absolute chaos and absolute madness. So as you probably know, I'm lead ambassador for the Reading Sea Report, and we've been testing participants this week for the new cohort just to see what their reading ability is like, just so we can measure them afterwards and see if our reading attention has improved their reading ability. So, the interesting thing about that is I have to manage it, I have to do the paperwork, and I have to do X, Y, and Z. So I'm not meant to directly test the participant at all. But what I am meant to be doing is everything else. So when there's an ambassador down, I have to do testing as well as all the other stuff that I have to do. It turns quite chaotic, especially when students are not when they're not in a school, so we can't test them. There's still 4 participants I need to test next time, which is a problem because it means I have to manage testing, but also other students and other ambassadors starting the intervention. So it's a lot of fun, and it's definitely chaotic, and it's definitely why I get paid money. But I do love the chaos. I do love being productive. Also, I've been catching up with some friends who I have not seen for months. In all fairness, I've not seen one of the friends I caught up with since August 2024. It was brilliant to catch up with her after so long. And I'm also going to be submitting ethics for my next study, but this is also my last study at my university, which part of it is a bit heartbreaking because I love my research. I love working with my supervisor. I love working on with trans people, and it's going to be a lot of fun. This next study, absolutely going to be a nightmare to actually analyze this data, but it will be fun. But this is my last study, means I'm never going to have to submit ethics again, which, in all fairness, half of this audience is probably quite happy about. And to be honest, so am I, because this one was just complicated, this ethics form though. So I am looking forward to it, but this will be the end of an era in a way, or at least an end of a chapter in my life. So that sort of stuff though. And to be honest, lots of other have been going on in my life, including lots of writing and different psychology projects, which I'm looking forward to. As always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me, connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave a comment at the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast. And you can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi whiteley. And you can always leave a comment on the Facebook post or LinkedIn post. And I always love to hear from all of you because it really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And please feel free to send the pictures of where you're listening from. I always love to see where everyone is around the world. And today's episode has been sponsored by Social Psychology, a guide to social and cultural psychology. So the reason why this is a great sponsor for today's episode is because this podcast episode focuses on concepts like misogyny, violence, inner groups, out groups, and by the end of this social psychology book, it's really easy to understand, it's engaging, and it's in a conversational tone, so you actually want to read it. Well, you'll understand the light psychology of persuasion, group influence, and social activism, but you'll also understand in groups, out groups, social identity, and intergroup conflict, as well as so many other great important areas that fundamentally underpin our society. So, but you're going to learn a lot from this book though, and this does consistently sell, and I do get lots of emails about how much people enjoy it. So that is Social Psychology, a guide to social and cultural psychology, available from all major ebook retailers, and you can order the paperback and the hardback version from Amazon, your local bookstore or local library if you request it. And if you want the audiobook narrated by artificial intelligence, now you can, at selected audiobook platforms like Kobo, Google Play, Spotify, Barnes & Noble, and selected library systems like Overdrive, Baker & Taylor, and Biblioteca. So whilst buying books helps to support the creation and the editing of the podcast, my time is sponsored by my wonderful patrons. And as always, a massive thank you to my patrons. Your support shows that you like the show and you want it to continue. So if you want access to tons of great rewards, including lots of different exclusive blog posts, which will not be made into podcast episodes for months, if not years, because for the foreseeable future, I'm releasing a brand new and exclusive blog post every day at 10 a.m. UK time. Then please head on over to patreon.com/Psychology World Podcast. And if you want to support the podcast on a one-off basis, now you can. buymeacoffee.com/Connor Wiley. So that's enough for personal update. Let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about do feminists hate men? So this is a great podcast episode. It's really good and I really enjoyed learning about it. So let's dive into it. So first of all, what is feminism? So feminism is the strongly held belief that the patriarchy harms everyone, including men. And this is why I have always supported feminism. Feminism just means the equality between the genders, so no one is better than the other, regardless of your gender. As well as certain genders do not have a higher status than other genders. Also, feminism believes that everyone will benefit from the liberation from the patriarchy and the sexist oppression that it supports. Unfortunately, some people see a feminist as simply as nothing more than men-hating misogynists as well as extremists. What is misogyny? In case you're brand new to what misandry was, like I was up until last year, misandry refers to the discrimination, prejudice, and hatred aimed at men that is rooted exclusively in their gender. Therefore, people who don't like feminism, and this includes men and women, believe that feminists are simply misogynists who only want to divide the world and create gender wars so they can fuel their agenda. And that I just laugh at the whole concept of like gender wars. It's utter rubbish. Unfortunately, Hammer and All 2016 and Brasso 2020 shows that almost 50% of the women and men in the United States see feminism as an ideology that unfairly punishes men for women's issues. Moreover, there is some debate about the existence of misogyny, and even if it does, whether this is a positive or negative. Some feminists believe that anger as well as outrage towards men is useful because it helps keep up the pressure on the throat of the oppressive system that stops women from being free of the patriarchy, as supported by Morgan 2014 and Antagonist and Van Sorenham 2021, whereas other feminists believe that misogyny is a mechanism that is against the ethics of the feminist movement, because misogyny makes it more difficult to invite and include allies in their work, fighting the injustice that women face. Hooks 2000. Personally, I am in the second camp quite firmly. I do not support misogyny because no one should face discrimination, prejudice, and hate because of their gender. For me and so many others, the entire point of feminism is that all genders are equal and no one faces discrimination and hate. Using misogyny and men's gender against them as a weapon is flat out wrong. Why does the myth of feminists as misogynists matter? The reason why public perception about feminists as misogynists matter is because it has very stark real-world implications. For example, so-called men's rights activists are increasing in number because they name feminists as their oppressors. Try and Valentina, 2013. As well as in the final year of my undergrad degree, I had a lecture on incels and extremist misogyny, and one of the reasons why these women want to kill, beat, and rape women is because they believe women are a threat to male rights. Therefore, this has led many so-called men's rights activists to only increase their hate towards women in recent years. These men use digital and physical forms of violence to threaten, hurt, and attack feminists. These men see it as a natural consequence of feminists' men-hating behaviour. Equal in all 2019, Diaz and Thaler 2019. Let's see if there's any truth behind this myth after all. Why is feminism as misogyny a myth? So my supervisor is actually a part of this main study for this podcast episode, which is exciting. As a result, a study by Hopkins et al. 2024 found that misogyny as a trait of feminism is a myth because they conducted 6 studies and recruited over 10,000 participants to study the traits of feminists and misogynists. Their first finding was that feminist women, generally speaking, do not hold any harsher opinions against men than non-feminist women and other men, as well as feminists tend to perceive men as fundamentally similar to women, and the differences we see between men and women are actually a result of the patriarchy than the core differences in our nature. Therefore, men are not the issue in themselves. The issue is with the patriarchy and the sexist oppression that it supports. Moreover, feminists actually hold men in a positive regard, and this regard is moderated by how threatening or safe a man is perceived to be. Also, when it comes to what men think of misogyny, feminist women in the study weren't significantly more hostile towards men than non-feminist women, but feminist women were less benevolent towards them. This suggests that although feminists don't hold hostile beliefs and attitudes towards men, feminists are less likely than non-feminists to cuddle to them, to practice humility when correcting them, or giving them a pass for their intentional harms. Overall, this study shows that the reasons why so-called men's rights activists believe feminists to be misogynists is because of their refusal to capitulate to men, and men see this refusal as a sign of misogyny and hostility towards them. This is not an accurate interpretation of this refusal. Why do some men view feminists as misogynists? The last section covered why feminists being misogynists is a myth. As a result of, whilst it is true that some feminist women do identify as misogynists, it is important to note that these are the tiny minority and they are not the norm amongst feminists. If there are anti-feminists who cannot understand that difference, then it is the same as men who apply the not all men argument to every single discussion without fail about men's harm towards women. Moreover, Downing and Rush 1985 is part of a small evidence base suggesting that women become more likely to identify as misogynists after realizing their own oppression. And over time, as the woman becomes more aware of the systems that underpin sexist oppression and sexism in the patriarchy, they start to disengage from hatred towards men and engaging with hating and wanting to challenge the system itself. This has led people to argue that if misogyny exists at all, then it appears to be a belief system that is short-lived in only a small number of feminists. On the other hand, when it comes to men who view feminists as misogynists, then they might never be convinced otherwise, due to these men see misogyny as a good, that I say in air quotes very firmly, excuse or reason to threaten and abuse women. Yet it is critical that even though it is hard to convince these men otherwise, that we keep trying, because it is about keeping women safe. It is critical all of us continue and realise that we need to fight this system, because feminists have realised that it is better to fight the system than individual men, and feminists should always engage compassionately with people who haven't gotten to the point of realising their patriarchal oppression yet. If these women who aren't a feminist yet, then feminists should gently urge women to turn their anger and frustration towards dismantling the patriarchal system in place instead of hating individual men. It is only by fighting the system that women will be free of oppression. Conclusion. On the whole, when it comes to feminism, there will always be a place for anger, because anger can drive us, motivate us, and inspire us to take steps towards change. Yet anger must be reserved for dealing with the systems of power that oppress women, and part of dealing with these unjust systems will be in engaging with individual men who do not support women's liberation. When this happens, anger might be needed, but only when absolutely necessary. As a result, when it comes to the future of feminism, we all need to make sure that our anger and outrage are applied to where they will have the most impact and be most useful in fighting the systems of power that oppress women instead of being applied to individuals. This will help keep feminists safe, and it will help us avoid those ugly and ill-informed stereotypes that depict feminists as misogynists. Personally, I want to wrap up this podcast episode by mentioning that I try to remove gendered language as much as possible from this podcast episode for two main reasons. Firstly, because both men and women can be anti-feminists, so I wanted to avoid continuing the idea that it is men versus women, and I want to highlight that not all women are feminists and not all men are misogynists. Secondly, I wanted to highlight that for all of human history, including the ancient Egyptians, the Byzantine Empire, and the figures from the Neolithic period, have always had a third gender category. Therefore, I wanted to highlight that true feminism is about gender equality for all genders. Here are some questions to think about at the end of this podcast episode. Do you identify as a feminist? How do you view feminism? Is your opinion based on facts or what someone has told you? If your opinion isn't fact-based, could you do some research in support of feminism? Finally, and perhaps most importantly, what could you do to help protect women today and going forward? So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode and you got something out of it. I know that I did it because I always want to celebrate International Women's Day. I just haven't got around to it in the 5 years of this podcast, which is bad of me, but I'm finally getting to it. And I really did want to challenge this idea that feminists should be like a dirty word because it shouldn't, because feminists are really like a good idea, they're great people, and there should be a gender equality for all genders. So I just wanted to help show my support a little bit more. And if you know someone who would enjoy today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And if you want to learn more, please check out Social Psychology, a guide to social and cultural psychology, available in all the usual places. And please let me know your thoughts and feelings on today's episode by contacting me on Facebook, LinkedIn, etc. And you can email me, connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. And if you want to support the podcast on a monthly basis, then please head on over to patreon.com/The Psychology World Podcast. Or if you want to do it on a one-off basis, then please head on over to buymeacoffee.com/Connor Whiteley. So, have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Found it helpful. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow the podcast on your favourite podcast app. And if you wanted to learn more, then please check out the backlist of the podcast episodes or my books at connorwhiteley.net. So have a great day and I'll see you next time.